The classical style originated in Greece in the 5th century BC. It flourished from about 450 BC to 350 BC and was closely associated with Athens. The three basic characteristics of the classical style are naturalism, idealization, and restraint. Familiar but fragmentary examples of the classical style are the so-called Elgin marbles, now in the British Museum, London. These marble sculptures, made around 440 BC, once adorned the temple of the goddess Athena built on the Acropolis Hill in Athens. Other equally significant monuments of classical Greek sculpture include the marble grave markers known as stele. One of the best examples was dedicated to Hegeso. It was made in Athens in about 410 BC. Hegeso's funerary monument is framed by a pair of pillars topped with a pediment. Two female figures in relief inhabit the rectangular enclosure. The seated woman is Hegeso. The only thing we know about her is that she was probably the daughter of Proxenos. That information is inscribed above the scene along the base of the pediment. The standing woman might be a relative or most likely a servant. She holds an open jewelry box resting on Hegeso's right thigh. Hegeso is probably looking at a piece of jewelry in her raised right hand. It's not visible now, but may have been painted on or attached. In her left hand, beside the box, she might have held another piece of jewelry. Let's see how this sculpture embodies the three defining characteristics of the classical style. First, naturalism. Another word for it is lifelike. Naturalism involves variety and depth. Variety can be found in how the two women vary in pose and dress. For example, one woman sits, the other stands, and they dress differently. Variety is also evident in the way Hegeso's clothes are carved. Hegeso's lighter linen dress or chiton is transparent and clingy in places, revealing her breasts and left leg. By contrast, around her waist, the fabric is bunched together in small folds, revealing little of the body beneath it. The servant's dress seems to be made of heavier fabric, hanging in smoother and bigger folds. Another point for naturalism is an awareness of spatial depth. Different sizes of figures can suggest depth. Hegeso is carved as a larger figure, the servant as a smaller one. So Hegeso is meant to be slightly closer to us and the servant farther away. Overlapping also conveys depth. The two figures overlap with Hegeso placed in front. The servant's foot is appropriately rendered behind Hegeso's left one. The second characteristic of the classical style is idealization, or what is beautiful according to contemporary aesthetic standards. The two women's faces, for instance, would be recognized as beautiful. They have smooth, youthful faces with slightly slanted eyes, straight noses, and full lips. Their facial features look lifelike enough, but they are not meant to be specific physical likenesses or portraits. Rather, the faces are idealized types. This idealization has moral implications. That is, physical beauty is synonymous with moral perfection. Alongside naturalism and idealization, there's restraint, the third characteristic of the classical style. There are two types of restraint, compositional and emotional. The classical style is all about the human figure, but compositional restraint means a balanced composition in which no one figure dominates. Hegeso, for instance, being the deceased, is the most important figure, but she is not dominant because she is not centrally placed. And while she is the larger figure in terms of width, she is not the tallest because she is seated. And we can move easily from one woman to another. We can do this through glance and gesture. The central position is taken not by a person, but by a jewelry box. Because each woman has a hand on the box and gazes at it, we can move along their arms, up to their shoulders and faces, and back to the box. We can repeat this back and forth movement many times. This way, we never linger too long on any one figure or object, so no one figure or object dominates the composition. Emotional restraint is evident when the figures are not involved in any highly dramatic thoughts or actions. Hegeso is merely looking at a piece of jewelry. Emotional restraint is also about creating a scene to which the viewer reacts calmly. It may make us feel sad seeing an image of someone who has died, but this grave marker is not supposed to make us weep. To the ancient Greeks, this image of Hegeso was quiet and soothing. This is a scene from Hegeso's domestic life. It commemorates her good character by portraying her as a modest woman who stays at home in the company of another woman. Moreover, the women's arms linked by the jewelry box form a kind of barrier to our entry into this very private exchange. The need to keep us at a distance further emphasizes Hegeso's modesty and discourages our physical and emotional involvement. Scenes of women indoors at home looking at their jewelry were common motifs in classical Greek funerary art. Similar images of women at home also decorated domestic objects, such as ceramic pots for carrying water or for storing and mixing wine. Pictures of daughters, wives, and mothers seated and looking at jewelry boxes or playing with a child in the company of a female relative or servant appear on small water jugs. This one in the British Museum, for instance, shows a seated woman, hand outstretched, waiting to take the jewelry box from her standing servant. This red figure vase was made in Athens at about the same time as the stele of Hegeso. Seeing such images on ordinary household objects lessens the desire to mourn when encountering a similar scene on a funerary monument. Hegeso's scene is meant to be joyful, not sad. Instead of shedding tears for her, we are supposed to celebrate her virtuous character and emulate her good life. The classical style began to fall apart in the second half of the 4th century BC. A marble stele made in Athens around 330 BC is typical of its time. It is still lifelike and idealized, but it is not as emotionally restrained as Hegeso's. The scene contains more figures, 2 women and a servant, who stands on the far left behind her seated mistress. A dove pecks at the floor under her stool. The woman on the right wears a veil, which tells us she has just come in from outside. She leans toward the seated woman and reaches out to her with both hands. She touches her hand and her face. Their eyes meet. So their arms are linked, but not to a jewelry box. Rather, they are linked to convey a close, intimate, and emotional relationship. And the servant holds a hand to her cheek, a traditional mourning gesture that might make a viewer cry.